Hello, welcome to the channel. So to start out, you have to understand that there's really only three types of attacks that advanced players tend to do. The first is peeks, where you swing into an angle and you use peeker's advantage to get the upper hand. The second is editing and shooting, where you edit and shoot immediately after, usually followed by a reset. The third type of attack is an edit bait, where you edit and then usually you reset in order to bait out an opponent's shot so they go on shotgun cooldown, and then it's pretty safe to go for a shot there. They can't really damage you back. An edit bait can also be performed by editing and building. That's another way you can do an edit bait because they will shoot the build that you just built instead of you, and that'll put them on shotgun cooldown. So that can work as well. Technically, there's pre-fires, but that's more of a defensive option. I wouldn't really consider it an actual offensive option that you tend to use to attack your opponent. There are specific techniques that are really used rarely, such as when you do an edit bait and then you pre-fire immediately after, trying to essentially predict when they're going to fall for the edit bait, and that allows you to get a shot off. That can work offensively as well, but I would say the use case of pre-fires playing offensively is very, few and far between. All right, so one more thing before we move on to the rest of the video, and we're going to talk about this more later, but basically you are able to combine multiple types of these attacks, and there is sort of a logical deduction that you can make here that no matter what you do in this game, every interaction you take is going to fall into one of these three categories, whether it be a peek. Granted, it can be a very bad peek, but technically it's still a peek, or it can be an edit and shoot, or it can be an edit bait. So these are really your only options to attack your opponent in this game. All right, it covers everything. It covers all attacks. All right, so let's talk about the first type of attack, which is peeks. So I'm actually not a huge fan of peeks. I think for most scenarios, they're actually pretty bad. Lately, I've been advocating pretty hard against them. I've been teaching a lot of my more advanced students to do less peeks and do more of the other two types of attacks. And if you look at the top fighters' gameplay, very rarely do they actually initiate a fight with a peek or finish a fight with a peek. Maybe it's like 1 out of 20 kills where peeks were the reason that they actually killed the opponent. I think there are a number of problems with peeks, and I do think that they are becoming outdated. All right, so we're going to go over some of those problems right now, what makes a peek weak and why peeks are weak, the situations that they're not so great in. Okay, so we're just going to treat this dummy as an actual player to demonstrate some of the issues with peeks. So this is a very common play in intermediate levels for players to do. Basically what they're going to do is they're going to go for a peanut butter here, and they're going to go for a peek here. And there's actually a big issue with this. There's multiple issues with this. So the first thing is that you have to hard telegraph that you're going to do a peek. And if it's a better player, they're going to have no problem with responding to you and going to safety. And they're actually going to know what you're doing, so they're going to have the upper hand in that interaction. Even bad players can respond to peeks in a poor way, making the kill much more difficult to get, or making things, not work as expected. Because I think if people understood the weaknesses of peeks, they would avoid a lot of the problems that they have going for peeks like this. So a lot of players go for this play here, and you can see I have to unpeek before I can properly peek into the angle. Okay, so if I don't do that, I just expose myself right here, right? But if I go for a peek like this, then I'm telegraphing what I'm doing. All right, so the way I think of it is this is an entirely different type of attack. That's an edit and shoot type of attack. This is a peek. Okay, so one of the issues with peeks is that you often have to telegraph that you're going to go for a peek in order to unpeek the edit that you're going to make. All right, so that way you don't just get shot as soon as you open the edit. So what my advanced players do when they see you going for this, they're going to track you through the wall, they're going to pre-fire, and they're going to have a way out. Okay, so that is what I would do. I always just default to the rebox sequence, very safe. I can come back here. Now I'm in my own peek. Now I'm in my own type of attack. This is technically like two types of attacks combined together because I'm resetting, which is an edit and shoot, plus a peek here. So I'm doing multiple types of attacks at once. But either way, you have to understand advanced players are going to have a very easy time responding to you just like telegraphing that you're going to do a peek. All right, they might jump up and pre-fire. That's another option. Granted, it's a bit more risky because you can get coned as you jump up, depending on the timing of things. But either way, you can see that's going to be a problem against advanced players. But let's talk about worse players. What happens when you fight a worse player? Well, a lot of the times, worse players might go for this sort of like last resort, preventive measure for getting peaked. They might tuck in the corner here, and this is going to make it much more difficult to kill your opponent. All right. Another thing they might do is they might see you going for a peek, and then they might use that time to actually just shove themselves in this corner, making it very easy for them to get counter damage. All right. All these they're obviously not thinking about these things. Most people don't think about these things, but they're doing it instinctively, and it becomes an issue. So basically, this first part of a peek that is often a thing where you have to telegraph that you're going to do a peek by unpeaking, it's a big issue. It's very slow. Okay. On top of that, there is another issue. Let's say I unpeak and then I need to swing into the peak. So now there's a second stage of a peak where I have to swing into the peak here, and it's also very slow. Okay, so what does this result in? This results in interactions, especially with the Sentinel, where it has a ton of build damage, where when you go for a peak and then you go to swing into the peak, the person just wall replaces because they see they're going to get peaked and they see they're going to take a bad interaction. Okay, so they sort of use the Sentinel as a crutch, and this is partly why I tell my students to practice mainly with the OG pump and creative a lot of the times, because the Sentinel can really be used as a crutch for these scenarios. Granted, this is an actual strategy that is used deliberately by pros. For example, if they know their opponent's probably going to go for some kind of peek or some kind of edit play, they just look and see, okay, where's my opponent not going to edit? All right, and a lot of times that's the bottom right corner here. They just look, they take the wall, and now they have a wall unexpectedly, right? Okay, so that was some of the issues that I have with peaks. The main thing is that it's just too slow. But now let's talk about what makes peaks strong, okay? I'm not saying that there's never a situation that you should use peaks in, all right? We're going to talk about what makes a peak strong and when it is appropriate to use a peak. So let's go back to the scenario here. If I do a peek here, a lot of times my opponent can actually return damage here. Okay, they can actually return a solid amount of damage here, even if I properly execute the peanut butter. They can go here, they might be able to shove themselves in the corner and return damage. So a lot of times this is an issue. And the reason it's an issue is because I'm close to the wall and my opponent is also close to the wall. So a lot of you guys have probably also played other FPS games like Counter-Strike, Valorant, COD, and in all these games, the same concept of peeker's advantage applies. Okay, if you are close to the wall and your opponent is also close to the wall, you're going to appear very fast, but so are they. They're also going to be able to return damage very easily. And yes, you have priority on the shot, but a lot of times they are actually going to be able to return damage. However, if you are doing a peek from farther away, now you are fast, they are super slow, and they can't really see what you're going to do. And there's very little chance that they're going to return damage. So this concept is a thing in every game because it's based on peeker's advantage. It's based on network latency. And it's still a thing in Fortnite. And a lot of people forget this. Okay, they think, okay, just because I have right hand peek and I'm swinging in, I have a bit of peeker's advantage, like that's enough. That's not always enough, especially if I'm playing defensively and I can't afford to get hit once. A lot of times that means I can't afford to go for something like this. And honestly, I would never go for something like this, even offensively, because if I'm willing to trade, I might as well just do an edit and shoot type play a lot of the time, right? If I'm willing to trade that hard. But basically the thing to remember is that peaks become very strong when you are close to the wall and they are far from the wall. Essentially, there's zero chance that they return damage on this kind of interaction because they are just too far from the wall. And I would say the main difference between Fortnite and other games, other FPS games, is that we basically have ESP. All right, this right-hand camera, this third-person camera, allows us to see our opponent through the wall. Normally, we would be in first person and we'd have to guess where they are, but essentially what we're doing is a pre-fire, right? Because we essentially have wall hacks to an extent. It's kind of like that effect. So we're able to shoot immediately. So you can imagine if you were playing an FPS game and you had wall hacks and you just wanted to be as blatant as possible, then a lot of the times you're going to be looking to peek at a very close angle at someone that's very far from the angle, and then you're just going to be pre-firing essentially as you swing around the angle. Okay, I hope a lot of that made sense, but even if you don't understand all of that and you don't understand peeker's advantage, what you can understand is this, that peeks are strong when your opponent is farther away and you are close to the wall. Okay, so when they're far from the wall and you're close to the wall. All right, so what does this tell you? This gets into common defensive strategies where if people are doing, let's say they're doing like a slow approach, let's say they're approaching from above, they have to go through 2 tiles. This means that I'm almost always going to have, the time to, and you can make it 3 tiles with this, by the way. I'm always going to have the time to make more boxes like this and set up a peek. Okay, so when they're approaching from above, let's say they were doing that, this is very bad for them. All right, there's almost no chance of them returning damage in this sort of scenario. Okay, so knowing how to use your peeks intelligently, I would say as a defensive option, it's usually very good. Every once in a while, as an offensive option, you might do something weird like this. Okay, you might be build fighting and there might be a lot of distance between you and your opponent, and you might just throw peanut butter in there. And this is actually a good type of attack because you're very close to the wall and they might not be very far. All right, so every once in a while, you'll see a high level player do this sort of thing. You don't really see low level players doing a ton of peanut butters in build fights, right? They just do it in box fighting. Okay, it would also be kind of a disservice if I didn't discuss peeker's advantage in itself and how you can abuse it to get an advantage in terms of peeks. A lot of people have this very narrow understanding of right hand peeker's advantage. Okay, you have to understand there's 2 components to a peek that give you an advantage. The first is right hand peek, where because your camera is a bit more to the right here, you can see a little bit more of your opponent before they see you if they're taking left hand peek, right? It's a very small advantage. I actually don't think it's super strong because once again, you have to actually be swinging into the thing. It has all the same disadvantages as every other peek. It's just another add-on to peeks that is like a slight advantage. So there's right hand peeks, but I would say the main thing is that you have to have peeker's advantage, which basically means that the faster you're swinging into the angle, the more peeker's advantage you're going to have. The more discrepancy between your screen and the enemy screen there is going to be due to latency. Okay, the packets aren't going to travel to the server and then to the enemy instantly. There's going to be about 60 milliseconds of delay before it actually gets to your opponent. And during that 60 milliseconds, a lot of times that means you want to maximize the distance that you covered in that time. Okay, so a lot of people will take these right hand peeks where they just walk to the side, but a lot of people don't actually know that if your opponent's just going into a left hand peek like this, when they're close to the wall, they appear fastest when they're close to the wall, and this pretty much guarantees that they can get counter damage. Okay, it doesn't matter how fast you reset, you can test this with a friend, they will almost always get counter damage if they just take this left hand peek due to the fact that they're close to the wall and they also have a good amount of peeker's advantage. Okay, so a lot of times what this means is that you're only going to be able to use your peeker's advantage and your right hand angle advantage in order to hit their shoulder for maybe 80 damage or so and then reset. Okay, and that's a skill in itself, is just taking less damage in order to ensure that you don't get counter damage yourself. All right, so not holding out for that stronger shot is an idea. Okay, but another idea is using, other forms of movement in order to get more peeker's advantage. For example, when I use this leap thing, I have a ton of peeker's advantage because I have a ton of speed. All right, this leap thing gives me a ton of speed. Another thing is falling from very high places, right? So if I'm way up here, and my opponent just has an edit open or something, a lot of people will see this and they won't understand that due to the fact that they're falling, they actually have a huge advantage here. Okay, so falling is another thing. Another thing is this, if you're taking left hand, it's not always a bad thing because you can slide into it. If you're sprint sliding into it, you have enough peeker's advantage in order to have priority on the shot. So you have to pay attention to where your mistakes lie in terms of using peeker's advantage and assuming that you have more peeker's advantage than your opponent. And higher level players need to be able to find ways to abuse peeker's advantage in weird ways like this. All right, let's talk about the second type of attack, which is editing and shooting. We kind of went over this earlier in this example. Instead of going for a peek and unpeeking behind cover so that you're not exposed when you confirm the edit, instead of doing that, what you do is you simply edit and shoot, completely exposed. All right, this is an edit and shoot type of attack. The main thing with the edit and shoot type of attack is that it's completely reliant on your opponent not being ready. Okay, so for example, if I go for this type of attack here and my opponent just has his shotgun out and he's just staring at me, what's going to happen is either he's going to pre-fire me and I'm going to die because I'm playing defensively here and I probably have HP disadvantage, or he's going to be playing reactively and as soon as I open an edit, he's going to react and he's going to shoot. Okay. Whether or not you get the first shot off is a bit unclear and it depends on Fortnite servers and stuff, who has the advantage in terms of getting the shot off first. But if you're playing with HP disadvantage, you can't even afford to really take a trade anyways. So a lot of the times your opponent will be returning damage even if you get the shot off first. Okay, either way, you don't really want to be taking gambles like this in your fights. All right, you want to be playing fundamentally sound, and this thing that you do, where you edit and shoot, where they're completely ready and they have their gun out, it's not fundamentally sound, okay? You're taking a risk, essentially. You're taking a gamble. All right, so just really quickly to sort of like put things into perspective, when is an edit and shoot type of attack good? It is good, and it is completely reliant on the fact that your opponent is not ready. Okay, so I would say this is the most common type of attack in high-level players. They do edit and shoot types of attacks because they have ways to get unexpected piece on their opponent, or they're familiar with situations like when I take a wall, I'm going to edit and shoot immediately without thinking about if I got the wall or not. That way I can get an advantage in terms of, my opponent has to think and react to if they got the wall or not, whereas I don't. In that 200 milliseconds or so, which is the average human reaction time, that 200 milliseconds or so is usually enough time to get a shot off before they can respond defensively. Okay, so that's just one scenario, but just understand that high-level players have ways of getting unexpected piece, or editing in an unexpected way. For example, what I just showed after the edit take. Another example could be this. Let's say I get doubles. Very common scenario for people to do an edit and shoot type of play. All right. If they're not ready, which a lot of times they won't be if you're properly executing this and using peeker's advantage in order to get unexpected doubles, a lot of the times they won't be ready for you and the edit and shoot type of play is going to be very effective. There's some things that you can do here if they are ready. Let's say they're just staring at you. You get doubles on them and they're just staring at you with their shotgun. There's some things that you can do here instead of that, and we're about to discuss that later. But just understand that if your opponent is ready on doubles, you probably shouldn't be just doing a simple edit and shoot type of play because they're ready, right? They're probably going to have priority on that shot, or they're going to pre-fire you. All right, and then one more thing about editing and shooting this type of attack is this very common mistake that intermediate players tend to make, is that when they're playing defensively and when they have HP disadvantage, they go for edit and shoot types of plays. Okay, I actually think this is very bad as a defensive habit. I think you should mainly be going for pre-fires into reboxing like this. The issue with this is a lot of players will think, okay, I'm just going to edit as soon as I see my opponent pull out their pickaxe, which can work a lot of the times on lower level players because they just go for double pickaxes. Like lower level / lower intermediate players, they just go for double pickaxes and then we just insta edit and we just kill them. All right, we kill them or we get our counter damage and it feels good. But the issue with that is that your opponent can always pickaxe bait. They can always move and bait or pickaxe bait. A lot of times you're not going to have this info if it's night and you're built out of metal. A lot of times you can't see when they're pulling out their pickaxe. A lot of times they're going to be dropping down with their pickaxe, hitting once, and then just pulling out their gun, waiting for the insta edit. So you have to understand that they can always pickaxe bait. And even if they pickaxe bait like this and you edit right after you see them pull their pickaxe out, the thing is this, you actually have to react to that situation. So you're going to have a 200 millisecond delay, whereas they're committed to the pickaxe bait. All right, so if they just do this, they're putting themselves on a 350 millisecond delay by pulling out their gun. You're also putting yourself on a 350 millisecond delay by pulling out your gun, but you also have a 200 millisecond delay because you're reacting to them pulling out their pickaxe. So they have the upper hand in that scenario. They're going to see you going for an edit before the edit actually goes through. So just understanding, yes, you have peeker's advantage, but you also have a 200 millisecond delay in terms of reaction time. Okay, so the fact that you have to react and they don't. So the pickaxe bait is always an option. There's no way to really know if they're going to go for a double pickaxe or not. So the edit and shoot play on its own is not very good when playing defensively. I'll talk a bit later in the video about how you can use the edit and shoot type of play when playing defensively. I've seen another coach, Psychoma, talk about this as well. Essentially what you want to do is you want to combine it with another type of attack. You want to combine it with peaks. All right, moving on to the next type of attack, edit baiting. What you have to understand about edit baiting is that it's directly tied to the edit and shoot attack. Okay, and I'm going to give you guys this very simple advice, and it's pretty much true for all scenarios. If you feel that you want to go for an edit and shoot type of play, for example, let's say I get these doubles here and I go for an edit and shoot type of play, but I see he's probably going to be ready. Okay, I see he has a shotgun out, or I see he has his blueprints out, or something like that. What you can do, or sorry, not has his blueprints out, but I see he's looking right at me and he's clearly ready for the edit and shoot type of play. What you usually can do is you just edit bait. All right, so anytime that you're doing an edit and shoot type of play and they're ready, you almost always can edit bait. And you can do this in weird ways. For example, doubles. A lot of people don't know when you're doing doubles, you can edit bait. All right. Okay, another thing is this. Let's say I'm just simply attacking my opponent. He's just holding a shotgun out. A lot of times what I can do is I can just simply edit bait. Let's say my opponent is sitting in this angle right here, and it's going to take forever for me to do a peek. And an edit and shoot type of play is going to result in me getting counter damage. What I can do is I just simply edit bait. All right, so fundamentally, if your opponent is ready for an edit and shoot type of play, you should always edit bait. Almost always. Another thing that I see with people doing edit baits is this. They don't make it convincing. So for example, if I'm here and I get these doubles unexpectedly, but then you can see that he's ready, and then I go for an edit bait, a lot of people would just go for this. They'll double edit and they'll just reset. And that's okay. Double editing and resetting is okay, but I'm kind of naturally doing it. I'm using my movement to essentially convince my opponent more that I'm going to go for an edit and shoot type of play, or I'm going to go for some kind of dumb piece control play. A lot of times what I'll do when I get doubles like this and I figure I need to do an edit bait type of play, what I'll do is I'll stand right on top of it to signify to my opponent, to tell my opponent, hey, I'm going to double edit down here and I'm just going to go for like this full piece, like clip type of play. All right, but then all of a sudden I just edit bait. It's very weird for your opponent to deal with, right? So I come down and I just reset. It looks like I'm going to fall down. I'm not. And from their perspective, it's a lot more convincing than just doing this, right? This is very unconvincing, right? Same thing with this. Okay, if I'm going to go for like an edit and shoot type of play here, I'm not just going to like I'm going to hold my gun out first. A lot of times when I do edit bait types of plays, what I'm doing is I'm using my gun, all right? I'm holding my gun out first. I'm not holding my blueprint out first. I feel like a lot of people do this as well. They hold their blueprint out because it's easier to reset, but it's not very convincing because no one edits and shoots like this. No one does an edit and shoot attack like this, all right? They always hold their gun out and they just hold the button down. So what I'm not doing is this, what I'm not doing is just standing still, doing this. This is super obvious, right? What you want to do is make it convincing. Hold your gun out. Pretend like you're going to do a peek like this, all right? Pretend like you're doing a peek and then go for it. So make it convincing. I think that's fundamentally very important because, you know, some people are going to be able to tell, hey, he's going for an edit bait here, or they're going to be less likely to react. If you make them feel like they're in danger, they're going to be far more likely to react to an edit bait. Another thing you should understand about the edit bait type of attack is that it's pretty much the strongest type of attack that you can do if you can pull it off. All right, the reason is this. If you can do an edit bait, they're on shotgun cooldown, and it's actually logically impossible for them to be able to deal counter damage to you unless they switch to the AR or something, which most people don't really do. And even if they do, you're going to out damage them in most of those scenarios. So even in those scenarios, it's just so strong because they're on shotgun cooldown. There's no chance of them returning damage. So I think it's the strongest type of attack if you can manage to do it, if you manage to pull it off. Also, you have to understand this, when your opponent is on shotgun cooldown, you can technically do whatever you want, right? So if I edit bait him here, or let's say I had an opponent here, all right? If I edit bait my opponent here and they shoot and they fall for it, I don't even have to go for a shot. I could even go for like full piece like this. You'll see some pros do this depending on the situation. It might even be more effective in like team fight environments as well. Because even if you take a shot, or even if you get the shot, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to kill them. But if you full piece someone, you have your whole team there, they're kind of dead, right? They're guaranteed to die. One thing that you can also take away from this video is that you need to be very conscious of when you're putting yourself on shotgun cooldown, because every time you put yourself on shotgun cooldown, your opponent can do anything they want. This is also a thing I noticed that people do, is they put themselves on shotgun cooldown all the time with the sentinels because they think, I'm just going to take every wall that I see. All right. You're putting yourself on shotgun cooldown and you're relieving a ton of pressure every time that you put yourself on shotgun cooldown, because they can do literally whatever they want. All right. There's no threat when you're on shotgun cooldown. So become a bit less reliant on taking walls with your shotgun because you're on shotgun cooldown, I would say. Sometimes it's such a big surprise factor that it's worth taking the wall with your shotgun. So you'll see some pros do that. It's usually like a memorized set play in which they know they're going to have a big advantage, or they're going to get a big advantage in terms of tempo. But a lot of the times, just using it as a crutch just puts you on shotgun cooldown, and it's not super helpful. One thing that I see a lot is like putting yourself on shotgun cooldown and then chopping. Like you're, like for example, I'm approaching above here. I take the cone very fast, but I have no follow-up, right? There's no threat here because I'm on no shotgun cooldown. If anything, they're going to open and edit and abuse the fact that I'm on shotgun cooldown. So it's like, just be aware of when you're putting yourself on shotgun cooldown. Okay, back to the main topic, edit bait type of attack. When should you not do an edit bait type of attack? So this one is largely a feeling thing. If I know my opponent is very good and they tend to pre-fire instead of playing reactively, what can happen if you go for an edit bait in a scenario like this is they can go for a pre-fire into a cone flip, and that will always be completely safe for them. And knowing that they might do that, sometimes you could just tell, okay, they're probably going to go for a pre-fire here. If I go for an edit bait, even though it's that small window of time, they can get off an insane pre-fire, what looks like an insane pre-fire, and get a shot on you. So it's kind of hard to explain, when you shouldn't do an edit bait, but just understand there's a small sliver of time here where they can shoot you. And if they're going for pre-fires, that can tell you, okay, I might get shot here. I might get shot. Even if I go for an edit bait, they might shoot in between that small period of time. Understand that there's no way they can play reactively and shoot through this. So if they do shoot through your edit bait, it is a prediction. It is a pre-fire. All right, guys, the final thing that we're going to talk about is combining multiple types of attacks. So we went over this example earlier where we actually, so here, let me set up the ramp like this. We went over when you get doubles on someone, which is very common, right? So if I get unexpected doubles on my opponent here and they're ready, like I see that they're ready, there's a couple of responses here that, could be tedious to deal with. The first is that my opponent has their shotgun out. This one is a bit easier because I can just edit bait, or I can edit and place a wall. All right. I would just go for an edit bait like this because it's far more convincing than going like this. All right. That is far more convincing in my opinion when they're holding their shotgun out here. But there's another thing that people tend to do, that I tend to do as a last resort a lot of times, is just holding my wall out, because when they edit this, a lot of times I can get this wall here. Okay. This is where you need to know how to combine multiple types of attacks. All right. So when I get doubles on this guy and I see, hey, he has his blueprints out, he's just going to place a wall here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place my own wall here and edit a window. Okay. And this is combining two types of attacks because I'm editing and shooting, and I'm also making it into a peak. All right. And the reason this works is because they're going to have to react to this. And during that time that they have to react, that gives me enough time to peak without, the fact that I'm telegraphing because I'm peaking being an issue, since they're reacting to something that they didn't expect, which is that I place the wall here and edit it into a window. All right, I hope that makes sense. But basically, the issue with the peak is that I'm telegraphing it, right? But due to the fact that I'm getting like 200 milliseconds or so from their reaction time, I'm able to complete the peak. That is why this works. All right, so transitioning doubles, like going for a double edit type attack, into a peak like this. And it is combining it because I'm also opening an edit and shooting. All right, so that's just one scenario where you can combine multiple types of attacks. Another scenario is this. So we talked about earlier how when you're playing defensively, you shouldn't really go for edit and shoot types of attacks. And I mentioned that you should go for them if you're combining them with another type of attack. Okay? Essentially, if your opponent is approaching at a really shit angle, they're making a mistake like this, where they're just approaching like this or something, you can return this damage without being, you can deal damage without being returned here if they're approaching at this angle like this. All right, so you should open the edit and shoot here because essentially you're doing a peek, but you're also doing an edit and shoot type of attack because you're literally changing the state of this wall here so that you can access this peak here. So it's like combining both types of attacks. Okay, so you need to combine both things in order for edit and shooting to be effective when you're playing defensively. Another example is this: if your opponent is falling off just like the top here, where they're going for doubles like this, they don't have a ton of downwards momentum to have peeker's advantage here. So a lot of times, like instead of hitting and shooting their feet as they're falling down is another good idea. All right, so technically it's an edit and shoot, but also it is a peek because they're just taking a really shit peek. Okay, so technically this is a peek. All right, and when you guys should become more familiar as you watch gameplay, as you play the game, with what type of attack you're going to be, what type of attack you're actually doing, what the goal of each type of attack is. I think a lot of people misinterpret a lot of the high level fighters when they do things like this, like they just took a left-hand peek. So left-hand peeks must be fine, right? But really, it's not a left-hand peek as much as it is like an edit and shoot type of play. Okay, so I hope this video helps with you being able to watch like pros gameplay and identify what they're actually trying to do. Are they trying to do a peek, or are they trying to do an edit and shoot type of play, abusing the fact that their opponent isn't ready? What is their goal? All right, guys, just to real quickly summarize what we went over in this video, we talked about how peeks are stronger when you're close to the wall and they are far from the wall. We also talked about how peeks are not necessarily restricted to only right-hand peeks. Given that you have enough speed, given that you have enough peeker's advantage, you actually have the advantage, you have the upper hand in the interaction. We also talked about how if you're going for an edit and shoot type of play, it is completely reliant on the fact that your opponent is not ready. So if I have unexpected doubles up here, it might be a good time to go for an edit and shoot type of play. But let's say I'm here and he's clearly ready, he has a shotgun out, he's ready for the edit and shoot type of play. Then I also explained to you guys that fundamentally, every time you go for an edit and shoot type of play and they are ready, you should go for an edit bait type of play. Okay, so in this scenario, I could just edit bait and then shoot. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. See you guys next time.